Greetings, Minecrafters, and welcome to another exciting Minecraft discussion on all things well-being. My name is Dr. Kimberly Quinn, and I am here today with Professor Warren Sides. I believe this is our fifth episode of the Champlain College Signature Series. And first of all, I'd like to welcome you, Warren.
Thanks for having me.
And is it okay if I call you Warren?
Absolutely.
Especially since I just did it. I should have asked you first. Okay, Warren, so if you could please start us off with telling us how long you've been here at Champlain and what your role is.
Sure. So I've been here about 15 years teaching math. For most of that time, about 10 of those years, I was an adjunct. Then I moved up to the full-time faculty position. So I'm one of the 3 full-time math faculty here at Champlain College. And yeah, I teach all things math. My history is a little bit more pure mathematics, but we have an applied bend here. So I use that foundation of theory to help students apply the math. And I've had the honor of teaching the introduction to statistics classes here. So I get a nice cross section of students, some with a little bit of math background, some with math phobias. But I try to sort of meet them where they're at and help them with their math journey.
Okay, so Warren, excellent. I have to say, I really enjoyed your presentation recently, and I was so moved by how you're able to incorporate humor and well-being into a math class, because math is such a stigma for the rest of us regular people.
Yeah.
And you did such an amazing job. So maybe, I also know you've done some research and you were telling me about it earlier about bringing well-being into the classroom or something.
Yeah, so exactly what you mentioned. The math classroom is sort of a place for stress for a lot of students, and it's hard to perform in a situation where you're feeling stressful. So I did research into the effects of well-being, different metrics for well-being, and on academic success. And the research is out there. It's pretty easy to find. It'll show you that students who are dealing with higher levels of stress are also doing a little bit worse in school. And they're having trouble keeping deadlines. They're having trouble keeping up with material. And a lot of different things go into what we would call well-being. But I decided to focus more on sort of like self-reported happiness. Like, do you feel like joyful in your life? Do you have like positive feelings? And seeing sort of how that related to the student experience. So just trying to make sure that on my own end, to research that I understand what factors might affect a student's ability to learn, not even the discipline, and then seeing how I might be able to bring that awareness to the classroom to increase sort of the academic standing of the students based on where they're at in sort of happiness.
Oh, this sounds really good, Warren. I also I heard you talking about different factors, leading sort of to students' levels of unhappiness, like spectrum, right? Like
Right.
unhappiness all the way to happiness. Do you think you can tell us maybe like what factors maybe played a role in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things, I mean, in the literature and the research that I had done, there was some obvious like demographics. Students that are from a minority group typically have more stressors, and that affects them. Gender, also depending on the discipline. I teach in the information technology and sciences division, and so female identifying students often have a little bit more of a difficult time because it's like a boys' club, right? Other factors that go into it is support groups in general. Like something that I ask my students in projects about happiness is if how their relationship with friends were this week, if any. And also something that I found interesting, and this hits a little bit personally, but having that authority figure that you're sort of friendly with, right? Even if it's just one person that you can talk to throughout, I'll use college throughout your college career, does a lot for a student. So some of the factors that I was looking at when I started like digging into it were, demographic information, gender, race, it's age, what the sort of historical information, what their family life was like, if their family had gone to college. So that's preparedness for, and then what their support network looked like here on campus. Is there a person that they talk to? Are there people that they talk to? And also, I guess I should mention like other outside factors like jobs, or health, illness in general. So those are all factors that I sort of considered that might affect a student's well-being in the classroom.
Wow. Okay, Warren. And like the buzzword I heard from what you were just saying was relationships, and this is I have to just chuckle because us regular people. I like to tease Warren because he's a math brainy, right? to be able to talk about relationships and creating this bond in college, possibly from first year through being a senior, but as the math guy, this is awesome. Can you tell
Right.
us more about it?
Yeah. So I think that, it's funny that you put it that way. That's kind of the motivation for me. I'm all about breaking stereotypes, breaking perceptions, right? And I come in as a math professor and be like, oh, math professor, stuffy math professor is going to be hard, going to be rigid. And I try to break that. I open up the students, and I think I do a pretty good job on day one. But something else that I do with my students is, in addition to office hours where they can come visit me to ask academic questions and get help with schoolwork, I also open up social hours. So an hour or two every week that's designated time where students could just stop by and hang out. And I do a pretty good job, I think, feeding that by telling people in class what I'm interested in and dropping interesting topics. I was like, well, if you want to pursue that more, come hang out with me in social hours. And it's amazing the success that I've had with this. My tiny little office, which probably holds like 2 or 3 people, I've had standing room only. There's 7 people wanting to hang out in my office, playing games, chatting, little different groups. It was like a party, right? Like some people were looking at videos together. Some people were working on my whiteboard to show me some cool math thing that they knew. But building that relationship is really important, I think, for both the students and for me. I'm learning from my students what the trends are and what's interesting to them, and they're learning how to sort of model that behavior of interacting with someone. And yeah, so I've had students go through all 4 years, and every year they come back and say, when are your office hours and when can we hang out? And it's just great. And I will chuckle just like you, like, who's waiting at the door of their math professor to hang out, not to ask math questions, right? Like, no, I know what I'm doing. I just want to see what you're up to and hang out. So yeah, so building that relationship. And I think that then I will add that I think it does trickle down in the classroom. So the students that come to social hours that are in a class of mine feel a lot more comfortable asking questions in the classroom then, or feel a lot more comfortable telling me that they're falling behind or that something is a struggle for them, because they know that they can talk to me in any way and it doesn't have to sort of affect their schoolwork. So I think that's important.
Wow, and of course, the positive psychology thing. I'm into that, Warren, and I'm hearing some good buzzwords here, right? Because Marty Seligman, father of positive psychology, is will tell us, as well as others, that the number one for longevity and high quality of life is relationships. And you brought that in, and now, I really want you to, if you don't mind, because I know you have a kind of in addition to your math, you kind of have this positive psychology vibe going on. Can you tell us about your interest in that?
Yeah, sure. When I first started teaching, I noticed pretty quickly that math students in a math class tend to make the same mistakes. And I was curious about that. And I always make the joke, if I ever went back to school, I'd go back for psychology to understand what that is. And it was a joke at first, but then I was like, no, it's really true. It's not the math that they're not getting. It's something psychological that's just not clicking for them, and it's universal. So I started looking into different psychological models that might help me understand the mindset of the student, and I gravitated toward positive psychology because, as you mentioned, I have a positive outlook. And it really, I think it was something that really struck me was, I'm going to paraphrase, but the idea of, we don't have to always fix things that are broken. Sometimes it might be helpful to strengthen what is working well, right? So let's elevate the strengths instead of fixing all the mistakes. And in doing so, I realized that's probably the approach that I should take in my math class, because I'm always fixing their mistakes. Right. And that didn't do anything. It didn't change them from making the mistake. So maybe if I just elevated their strengths and made them feel more comfortable, then even though they're making the mistakes, they're growing more from that and they're not shutting down. So
Wow, excellent, Warren. It's almost like, and we are not scripted. This is live action going on, and I couldn't, if I did script, I couldn't script Warren better, because he's throwing all kinds of positive psychology, stuff around. And for those of you who may not know, Champlain College in general is very strengths based, in our approach.
hmm.
And I happen to know, just because I've known Warren for a while, and we're friends. And also, I attended his presentation a couple weeks ago. Warren has this amazing ability to hone in on student strengths in math. I think with independent projects. You want to tell us about
Yeah,
that?
so in most of my classes, I do projects, and the projects are scaffolded, so they increase in difficulty and throughout the semester as we learn more material. But I leave it up to the students to sort of pick their topics and pick how they want to sort of direct those projects, and then I just sort of support them. And I think that idea of focus on something that you know you're good at and something that you know you're going to work towards increases their ability to actually do it. So I'm focusing on the strengths that they already have. So instead of giving them a normal example, I'll use a statistics example where you're, you know, whatever, counting marbles in a bag. It's a classic example. It's like, well, I don't want to give you the example. You come up with something. It's like, well, I want to count the number of people that go through the penal system, and I want to know how to figure out those numbers. It's like, awesome. It's the exact same formula, but now I'm applying it to something that you care about, and you're because of that, because of your interest and because of your background knowledge and that strength that you bring to the classroom, you are more likely to take this lesson on counting more seriously, or not even more seriously, just understand it better.
Wow, Warren, and where my head is going now, especially that fabulous 56,
Hmm.
that I know many of us who went through, the quote unquote old school math situations have been, maybe it's a little too extreme to say, scarred, but it was so rigid skill and drill, and to hear what you're doing with students, I can only imagine, that actually gets them excited, and it sounds like it reaches the neurodiverse maybe a little bit too.
Mhm.
Maybe you can. I know you've got some more up your sleeve there that you can explain sort of how you've busted through the stigmas and the rigidity of what many people think of math.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple different ways to add what I'll say flexibility to a math curriculum. Um, and one of the things that I do is I give students the option to pick a topic that they're interested in and follow that, and I just give them the math skills that they need to answer the questions that they already have in their head, right? They just didn't know how to answer them. So that's giving a little bit of flexibility. It's not everybody doing the same project. Another thing that I do is with the final exams at the end of the semester, I give students an option to either create their own, literally, they create their own exam that hits the learning objectives for that. So they know what types of questions they should be able to answer, and they create them and then they answer them. And that's, again, giving them a little bit of freedom, give them a little bit more flexibility in the I don't need you to answer my questions. I need you to answer questions of a type, and you can create those. But they could also, if they don't want to take a test and feel sort of stifled by that system, they can create an image, like a mind map, where they draw a picture of the topics in the class and they're making the connections that way. I still require an example or two to work through the sort of mechanics of the mathematics, but seeing that a student understands those connections, I think is enough. I think that's great. And I think that that's sort of a break from the traditional math curriculum where it's like, I need to see that you can do these problems. It's like, I trust that you can do those problems, but what I hope is that you see the connection between these ideas, right? So a couple of flexibility. So in addition to giving them the freedom to pick topics of interest, but also picking a type of assessment that works for them. The third thing that I'm doing this semester that I'm kind of proud of is I'm bringing in sort of historical primary sources so that students can see the differing perspectives of a mathematical topic as it was being developed. And that sort of gives them this power, I would say, to understand that their way of thinking about it, even though it's different, can still be correct, because that's how all of math was formed, from differing thoughts being sort of, congealed into something that we then package and hand to someone else. But being able to apply or to follow different paths to a solution, I think is important, rather than, like you said, the rigid approach that you're probably used to, whereas this is the way. It's like, well, there isn't the way, right? Lots of people have different ways of doing things. And I think that when students see different ways, they start to become, like I said, empowered to do things their way, as long as they understand that it has to follow some sort of logical rules and get to a reasonable conclusion.
Okay, so once again, Warren, this is fantastic, and I am trying to break out of my, old school, stuck in the workbooks with the little Martians. I remember like in first grade, and also the red pens, because the red pens go nowhere good, right?
Yeah.
Shaming and terrible, and it's wrong. And I heard you just say some things that it's hard to even like relate to it at this age in with regarding to math. And I heard you say empowering, and to me, whether it's math or it's anything, like empowered is empowered, like
Mhm.
that travels outside of your classroom. You also talked about young adult agency, which feeds into empowered, and then you said different thinking converging into different paths, and then lastly you talked about one of your assignments being like a visual map. So I'm thinking you must be able, with this sort of new very cool way of reaching students, you must be reaching different learning styles.
Yeah, I mean that's the hope. In addition to positive psychology, I looked into universal design as a construct for teaching, and being able to give students options. One, I think is great, but being able to give them the options that then focus on their strengths and give them the opportunity to show that I really do know what I'm doing. I just couldn't present it in the way that you gave me before. Um, I think is really helpful for the students, and I think that like you said, that agency goes a long way. Whether they make mistakes or not, they still feel invested in. They still feel that they have power to ask questions and to continue further. And just to cycle back to the conversation on flexibility, I've extended my due dates for assignments as well for that reason. So if a student's having trouble getting the assignment in the way that I have it done, then we can talk about it and we can push the due date back and we can refocus on what works best for them. As long as they're understanding the general concepts and getting the connections between them, the assessment, how they show me that they know that is flexible, is really up to them. Yeah.
Wow, I can't help thinking, gee, I wish math was like this, back in the day when when ferns covered the earth and glaciers were shifting. But um, all that said, since the pandemic, or we can say it's over, it's almost over, nobody knows if it's over, whatever. I'm wondering, Warren, if you, first of all, have you seen any differences in student processing and output since then? And if so, how did you kind of respond to it?
Yeah. So when the pandemic started and we all had to pivot sort of our approaches, I went with the less is more approach. That there are certain things that I absolutely have to get across in a classroom, and there are other things that I just personally want in a classroom. And I thought, I can remove what I want from the classroom and make sure that the students are getting the experience that they need. And so I lightened it a bit, and the students' response was pretty overwhelmingly like, "Thank you." Like I get that you're doing this, and I'm still going to put forth the effort. I just understand that we don't have to do quite as much. So that was one thing that I started to do, and I'm still sort of taking that now because it's amazing how much you realize, like, well, that maybe that was just fluff, maybe that was just my own personal experience, thinking that that was an absolute necessity part of the course. Uh, and so students, so at the time coming into it, they weren't really sure how to respond to things, and I think that they're in a like separating the classroom from the classwork was difficult at first, and understanding that they had to do things on their own. And then so flash forward now, here we are in the classroom again, and I think students are still coming back into it and realizing the amount of work that they need to do outside of the classroom. But I hope that all the things that I've talked about earlier sort of give them the chance to sort of get into that on their own pace, right? And in their own time, reasonable amount of time, but still within their own time, so they're not rushing to back into something that they're not ready for. So that's one of the things that I've noticed is a little bit of a difference, like students struggling with that outside of class time and the inside of class time. Uh, but as far as like the actual engagement in the classroom is concerned, I think that ironically the other way, they're more engaged in the classroom. They want to be there. They want to learn. They want something more reminiscent of what they expected to see before. Um, so I think that has changed in the classroom. The dynamic of there's a little bit more interest in the material, but there's a little bit less effort outside of the class. It's a weird balance there, if that makes sense.
Actually, it's funny you say that because my head just went to there. I've noticed that in my classrooms, like they're with my classes too, Warren. They're excited to be there, but there's definitely a fogginess or something with interpreting deadlines and going
Yeah,
through.
yeah. So I'm not sure. I I don't know if this is appropriate to talk about, but if my efforts of flexibility are helping or hurting that, right? If I increase flexibility, does that mean that they're giving themselves more time to do stuff than when they should be working on consolidating that time frame? I will still hang my hat on they're happy about it, and that means they're going to be doing more with it. So I will keep my flexibility, and I don't think it's a problem. Maybe my research will go beyond that, and I'll quantitatively assess it. But I think that for now, the acknowledging that the students do need their time to decompress and to process, and they do need time to get back into the world after being away from social interactions and things like that. That as much as I can do in the classroom to help them, the better. And as much as I can give them sort of the grace of time to catch up on other things, I think that'll always help them.
Oh, I definitely, Warren. And when you're talking just now about the flexibility thing, to me, I actually applaud your honesty for one, and also, you know, being honest and being willing to try something new. Because, of course, in my Minecraft positive psychology hat, you bringing in flexibility to the classroom, to me, translates into you're bringing resiliency skills into the
Yes.
classroom and compassion.
Yeah, and something that you just said, that I also think I do well in the classroom is I communicate with my students regularly. So if I start to notice that a large group of people is slipping on assignments, I'll bring in the classroom like, hey, what's going on with these assignments? Are they a little bit harder than the other ones? Is it just something happening in your world outside of classroom? And I leave that class time to have that discussion. And I think that students also respond to that. They know that they will not be judged immediately and harshly by any shortcomings, that there's time to converse and to communicate about it. And it's actually, I think, over time, since the beginning of this semester, students are now proactively coming to me saying, look, this is something that's going on in my life, or this is something that I feel is happening in the classroom that is causing me to struggle. And then we have, I won't call them negotiations, but a discussion about what we can do to change the class to make it better for everybody. So I think that giving them that flexibility and giving them sort of that grace and that leeway elevates their, again, back to the agency, so that when they're in the classroom, they can ask those questions. They can remark about what their struggles are and what they think, might work better for them. Because, separating the I hate being an authority figure, right? And so I go into the classroom pretending to be a professor and an authority figure, and pulling it off sometimes. But I want the students like, that shouldn't be how it is. Like, you know as much as I do about certain things. I just have experience in this one area. So please share with me, you better than I will. So I just need to open up those lines of communication. But yeah, so I think that adding the flexibility is helpful. And I think that allowing the students to have that voice is helpful as well. Which remembering what the original question was about rigidity and stuff, but yeah.
It doesn't matter, Warren, because you're just going every place, great. And it's especially since, you and I are both fans of all things well-being, that you are role modeling. It happens to be through math, right?
Right.
Because, but really you are role modeling for them skill sets that will be the gifts to keep on giving: the flexibility, compassion, whether you're saying it or just doing it,
Yeah.
which is even better, right? You're kind of, I care enough about you to have this connection, have these social hours, to give the flexibility, to be available for you. And then the other thing, Warren, I just heard like towards the end there, is we've done a lot with trauma discussion here at Champlain, right? And the pandemic counts. That's a trauma, and it rewires the brain, as you well know. And the number one and two, well, kind of one and one, with trauma is voice and choice, and you're doing that. You're doing both
Right.
like simultaneously. They have a voice, and they have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad that you put it that way. Like, I never really pieced together those two aspects of what do we call, like, trauma informed teaching, to give them that choice, to give them that voice. That's I feel weirdly like I'm tooting my own horn, but that's something that I always thought was important. I thought that was something that always, like, students are not going to succeed if they don't feel comfortable with the person that they're learning from. So day one of class is connections before content. And I think that my students get that. And I could be the worst math teacher in the world, but my students will always feel comfortable and ask me questions about what we're learning. So if I fail to teach a lesson well, they'll raise their hand and say, I don't get any of that, Warren. We need to do it again. I'm like, you're absolutely right. Let's do it again. And I appreciate that voice. I appreciate them having that power to say something. And also, like you said, modeling it when they go out in the world, they're going to have to be these authorities. They're going to have to question people. They're going to have to go through the motions of asking the right questions. And I think that we train them for lots of things. And I think that's something that just even getting that experience is incredible.
No, I couldn't agree more, because these skill sets are just, the mindset, the importance of the mindset. All of this is way more important than, in our opinions, I think collectively, than anything we're teaching.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. And on that note, this is Professors Kimberly Quinn and Warren Sides signing off from the gorgeous Champlain College campus in Burlington, Vermont. Have a mindful day.